When Adrian Vale arrived in Gull's Point, he did not arrive like other people. He did not come with one suitcase and a tired smile. He didn't ask anyone where the best bakery was, or which road flooded when the tide came in, or whether the gulls really stole chips from your hand if you weren't paying attention. He arrived with 3 dark vans, 6 sealed crates, 2 assistants in quiet trainers, and a long silver case that looked as though it belonged in a museum or on a moon landing. By 10:30 that morning, the whole town knew 2 things.
After all that running.
First, the old Coast Guard house on the hill had finally been rented.
And it's only getting
Second,
better. Let's
the
fly
man
it
moving
later.
into it was Adrian Vale. Even in Gull's Point, where most people were sensible enough not to care too much about celebrities, that name meant something. Adrian Vale was the inventor people wrote think pieces about. He was the one who had built home robots that could sort medication, drones that could inspect bridge cables in minutes instead of days, and disaster systems that could map flood paths before the rain had even finished falling. He had been on magazine covers with his sleeves rolled up. He had stood on stages in soft black jumpers talking about the future as if he had already been there. He had more money than most people in Gull's Point could picture, and yet, according to the papers, he had recently disappeared from public view, which, naturally, made the town even more interested. From the window of the bakery, Mrs. Penrose watched the last crate being carried up the stone path and said, "That is either a genius or a man who has never packed his own kettle." From the harbor wall, Mr. Talbot squinted up at the house and said, "If he starts launching rockets off that cliff, I'm complaining." At the post office, 2 tourists asked who Adrian Vale was, and 3 people answered at once. Only one person in Gull's Point did not care that the famous inventor had come to town. Her name was Nia Bell. She was 10 years old, and she was at that moment running full speed across the square with a torn red kite tucked under one arm. She had other concerns. The annual Wind Day festival was 4 days away. Her kite, which had survived 2 summers, one spectacular collision with a church drainpipe, and a misunderstanding involving a spaniel called Murphy, had finally split along one side. Nia skidded to a stop beside the bench outside the old chandlery, dropped to her knees, and stared at the damage. "No, no, no," she whispered. The kite lay across her lap, crooked and wounded. Red paper, white paper patches from old repairs, and a blue tail made from strips of fabric her grandfather had cut from a shirt he no longer wore. It had a name. Of course it did. Comet. Nia ran a finger along the tear. "It's fine," she told the kite firmly. "You are absolutely fine. This is not the end of you." From behind her came the sound of footsteps and the careful clearing of a throat. She looked up. The man standing there was taller than she had expected, though she could not have said what she had expected exactly. Older, too. Not old, but older than people on giant billboards seemed. He wore a navy coat, no tie, and the kind of trainers that looked expensive because they were so plain. He glanced from the kite to Nia. "That does not look fine," he said. Nia stood at once. "I know that." There was a pause. He nodded once, as though confirming a theory. "Right." He started to move past. Nia narrowed her eyes. "Are you Adrian Vale?" He stopped. People often changed when they were recognized. They straightened, or smiled, or looked pleased. Adrian Vale did none of those things. "Yes." Nia looked at him for 2 seconds longer, then held up the kite. "Can you fix this?" He blinked. It was not perhaps the sort of question he was used to receiving 5 minutes after moving to a new town. "I build large systems," he said. "So that's a yes?" "That is not what I said." "You build robots?" "Yes." "And flying things?" "Sometimes." "And smart things?" "Yes." "Good." Nia shoved the kite towards him. "Then this should be easy." He looked at the kite as if it had personally offended him. "A kite is not the same as a drone. It flies. It drifts. It still goes in the sky." He looked at her. She looked back. The wind lifted the end of her braid and slapped it against her cheek. She ignored it. Finally, he said, "I'm busy today." Nia lowered the kite. "Oh." For the first time, something in his expression shifted. Not warmth, exactly, more a flicker of discomfort. He glanced at the tiara again. "When is it needed?" "Festival on Saturday." "That is 4 days." "Yes." "Bring it to the Coast Guard house tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Nia's face brightened so fast it was almost alarming. "Really?" "Yes." "You'll fix it?" "I said bring it. I did not promise a result." "That's still basically a promise." "It is not." "It is." "It is not." Nia grinned. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Vale." Before he could correct her on how promises worked, she had already sprinted off across the square, clutching Comet like treasure. Adrian Vale stood very still for a moment, the sea wind pushing cold salt against his face. Then he looked down at his watch, turned, and continued up the hill. Inside the Coast Guard house, order was already taking shape. Cables ran along the floor in neat bands. Screens glowed in one upstairs room. A compact workshop had been assembled where the dining table used to be, complete with tools, soldering equipment, a 3D printer, a precision cutter, and 3 small sealed cases marked fragile. His assistant, Mina, stood in the doorway with a clipboard. "The eastern terminal is still not syncing," she said, "and the delivery for the marine sensors was delayed at Exeter. Use the backup set." "We did. That caused a conflict in the calibration tree." Adrian removed his coat. "Then rebuild the tree." "We did that too." He paused. Mina gave him the smallest possible shrug. "The system does not care that you're famous," she said. "It should care that I designed it." Apparently not. He exhaled through his nose and walked to the central table, where a scaled coastal model sat under white task lights. The model represented not Gull's Point exactly, but a coastline like it. Jagged inlets, harbor walls, rising tides, weather variables. He had come here to finish Project Turn. That was what the world would later call it, if it worked. A self-coordinating coastal rescue and response network. Drones, sensors, wave readings, wind mapping, predictive response. In public, it would be called a leap forward for climate resilience. In Adrian's head, it had become something simpler, one last thing to prove. For weeks, the project had stalled on a single maddening problem: adaptation in unstable wind. Every simulation showed the same flaw. The units corrected too hard, too fast, too often. They fought the air instead of reading it. He had not solved it in London. He had not solved it in Zurich. He had not solved it in the brutal stillness of hotel conference suites and glass offices where everyone waited for him to be brilliant on command. So he had come here, to the edge of the map, to wind, to quiet, and apparently to a torn kite. At 10 o'clock the next morning, Nia Bell arrived exactly on time, at 9:58 to be precise. She stood outside the Coast Guard house with Comet tucked under one arm and stared at the front door, which was painted a weathered blue and had a brass knocker shaped like a fish. The house looked less mysterious up close. There were still cables visible through the front window, and a metal case by the wall, and a temporary weather mast rising beside the old chimney. But there was also a mug on the windowsill, and a pair of muddy boots by the step, and one very ordinary fern in a pot that looked as though it had been bought in a panic by someone told a house needed something green. Nia knocked. Nothing happened. She knocked again, louder. From somewhere inside came a dull thud, a muttered word she was not supposed to hear, and the quick sound of footsteps. The door opened. Adrian Vale stood there in a charcoal jumper and work trousers, a pair of slim protective glasses pushed up into his hair. He looked mildly surprised to find a person on his step. "You came." "You told me to." "Yes, I remember that part now." Nia held up Comet. He stepped aside. "Come in." The inside of the house smelled faintly of solder, coffee, and sea air. There were screens along one wall, each showing maps, figures, or something Nia did not understand. One room had been turned into a workshop so clean it barely looked used. Nia stared at everything. Have you got a robot dog? No. What about a normal dog? No. Do you sleep here? He looked at her. That is generally how houses work. She nodded as if this were fair. He set a clear space on the work table. Let me see it. Nia placed Comet down carefully. Adrian bent over it. For a full minute, he said nothing. He checked the spine, the paper, the crossbar, the fabric tail, the knots, the old glue. His movements changed. They became quieter, more precise, less public. This, Nia noticed, was different from when grown-ups pretended to be interested. He was actually looking. Finally, he said, "This has been repaired several times already." Yes. By whom? Me and Granddad mostly. Not professionally. Nia folded her arms. It flew. That is not a professional standard. That sounds like losing talk. He ignored that. The balance is poor. The crossbar is warped. The paper tension is uneven. The tail is too heavy for the current frame, and this repair here is making the left side drag. Nia blinked. So can you fix it? He straightened. Yes. Her whole face lit up. But, he added, not by preserving this exact structure. Her smile paused. What does that mean? It means the current design is unreliable. It means you want to change it. I want it to function. It already functioned. It limped. It flew. Once, perhaps. Every summer. He looked back down at the kite. Then, in the tone of a man about to make a deeply reasonable proposal, he said, I can build you a better one. Nia's expression closed at once. No. He seemed genuinely puzzled. No? I didn't ask for a better one. I asked for this one. This one is flawed. So are lots of things. He blinked again. Nia leaned over the table and tapped one of the old white patches. My granddad put that one on after it flew into the bandstand. This blue bit came from Mum's old apron. That knot is ugly because I tied it in a hurry when it started spinning over the beach. This is Comet, not some factory replacement. Adrian looked at the kite, then at the girl. I can preserve the external appearance. That is not the same. He was silent for a moment. He didn't seem offended, more as if he had encountered a problem with invisible edges. What if I repair it, he said carefully, and improve its flight characteristics without changing its identity? Nia narrowed her eyes. That sounded slippery. It was accurate. She thought about it. Fine. But no turning it into a robot. I had not intended to turn it into a robot. Good. He nodded as though agreement had been successfully reached between nations. Come back this afternoon. What time? 4. Can I watch? No. Why? Because concentrated work is harder with commentary. I don't do commentary. He looked at her. She sighed. Fine. I do some commentary. At 4 o'clock, Nia returned. At 4:01, she was standing in Adrian Vale's back garden staring up into a pear tree while something expensive hung upside down from a branch. It was red and triangular and technically based on Comet, but only technically. Why, she asked slowly, is my kite making a buzzing noise? Adrian, standing nearby with a controller in one hand, frowned at the machine in the tree. It should not be. Nia turned to him. He had, it seemed, done exactly what he promised not to do. Comet now had a carbon frame, reinforced joints, a smooth synthetic skin, a tiny sensor cluster near the spine, and what looked suspiciously like 2 microstabilizers tucked near the edges. You put parts in it. I integrated lightweight correction modules. You roboted it. That is not a verb. It is now. It should have flown. It did fly. For 3 seconds. For 12. Then it attacked a tree. It did not attack the tree. It overcompensated in gust transition. Nia stared at him. That is the poshest way anyone has ever said it got stuck. Behind them, Mina stood at the kitchen door trying not to laugh. Adrian ignored both of them. He reached for the ladder, set it against the tree, and climbed up with irritated dignity. Nia folded her arms and watched. When he got back down, holding the silent remains of Prototype 1, she said, "I told you not to make it too clever." "I did not make it too clever. It's got a brain. It has basic corrective logic. That is a brain. It is not. It thought badly." Mina snorted and vanished back inside. Adrian set the kite on the garden table and examined the readout. The gust profile shifted faster than predicted. Nia leaned in. "Or," she said, "the wind wanted a kite and you sent it a lecture." He looked at her. She looked at him. Then, for the first time since arriving in Gull's Point, Adrian Vale laughed. It was short, surprised, rusty from disuse, but it was real. Nia grinned at once. "There you are," she said. "You do have a normal face." The next day, Adrian tried again. This time he used a lighter paper skin, no motorized correction, and a redesigned frame based on scanned measurements from the original Comet. He told himself he was simply refining. He told himself he was not being drawn into a personal competition with a 10-year-old. He told himself several things. At 3 in the afternoon, he and Nia took Prototype 2 to the clifftop field above the harbor. Half the town somehow knew. Mrs. Penrose arrived with a paper bag of warm buns. Mr. Talbot leaned on the gate with the posture of a man claiming not to be interested while being extremely interested. 2 teenagers sat on the stone wall filming openly. Nia looked around at the gathering crowd and whispered, "Did you invite everyone?" "No." "Then how are they here? This is a small town." Mr. Talbot called, "We heard the future was flying at 4. Adrian tightened his grip on the spool. "It is a kite, not a product launch." "Shame," said Mrs. Penrose. "I'd have worn earrings." Nia stepped close and pointed at the field. "Just run. I know how to launch a flying object." "Do you know how to launch a kite?" He hesitated. Nia nodded grimly. "That's what I thought." 5 minutes later, Adrian Vale, inventor of systems used in 12 countries, was jogging across a windy field while a red kite wobbled behind him like an uncertain crab. "More line," Nia shouted. "It is unstable." "That's because you're strangling it. I am controlling it. That's the problem." The kite lifted, dipped, twisted once. For one glorious second it caught. A few people clapped. Then it spun sideways, sailed directly into Mr. Talbot's cap, bounced off, and skidded face first into a patch of gorse. The field fell silent. Then Mrs. Penrose said with great kindness, "Well, it's got spirit." Nia trudged over, picked up the kite, and held it in front of Adrian. "It still thinks too much." He took the spool from her. "This one had no active system. It still thinks like you." That annoyed him, mostly because he could not dismiss it. He looked out over the sea. White lines on the water, wind tugging at every sleeve and loose thread and blade of grass. In his work, every problem yielded eventually to greater information, better materials, more precision, enough data, enough control, enough iteration. But kites did not seem to respect data, or rather, they respected something else first. Nia took Comet's damaged substitute from his hands. "My granddad says a good kite doesn't fight the wind," she said. "It gives the wind something to hold." Adrian looked at her. "Your grandfather said that?" "Yes." "Does he build kites?" "He used to build loads. He was a sailmaker before his hands got bad." That made something shift inside Adrian's head. Sailmaker, of course. Fabric that flexed, structure that yielded, strength through response, not rigidity. He looked at the kite again, suddenly seeing not a failed object but an argument. "You should have said your grandfather was a sailmaker. You should have asked." That evening, Adrian sat at the table long after dark with Comet laid open beneath the lamp. For the first time, he did not scan it, did not model it, did not design around it on a screen. He touched the paper. He bent the old spar between thumb and forefinger. He let the frame tell him where it strained, where it held, where it needed less force and more grace. Outside, gulls cried in the dusk. In the kitchen, Mina made tea and wisely said nothing. Finally, Adrian spoke. I built the second prototype to resist variance. Mina set down his mug. That sounds sensible. It was wrong. She waited. He looked at the torn red paper. I keep building as if the world is a mistake that can be corrected. Mina leaned against the doorframe. And the kite? The kite only works if it is allowed to listen. There was a pause. You know, she said, most people pay a great deal of money for that sort of insight. I got mine from a child in Wellies. Even better value. The following morning, Nia arrived to find Adrian sitting on the back steps with strips of bamboo, paper, a small knife, and a spool of thread. No 3D printer, no screen, no precision rig. She stopped dead. Who are you? She asked. And what have you done with Adrian Vale? He looked up. I'm adapting. You're using actual hands. Yes. On purpose? Yes. She walked around him slowly, as if checking for signs of possession. Then she sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere downhill, a dog barked twice and stopped. Adrian held up one strip of bamboo. I sourced these from the craft shop in town. Nia gasped. You went into a normal shop? Yes. What happened? A woman called me love and sold me 6 strips for £3. Nia nodded solemnly. That checks out. He passed her the frame pieces. Show me how you and your grandfather tie the cross join. She brightened at once and scooted closer. Like this, not too tight or it goes stiff, see? He watched carefully. Why not use adhesive? Because thread lets it move a little. He looked at the knot again, flex at the joint, yield at stress points. He almost smiled. All right, he said. Again. So they worked, not for an hour, for 5. They rebuilt Comet from the inside out, but gently this time, not replacing its soul, strengthening what mattered, keeping the old patched paper where they could, rebalancing the spine, trimming the tail, adding 2 new strips of fabric cut from a faded yellow tea towel that Adrian found in a drawer and insisted was only because the blue tail needed counterweight. Nia did commentary, plenty of it. She told him which gull in the harbor was a menace, which teacher at school secretly cried at assembly songs, which chip shop had the best chips and the worst chips, why seagulls were definitely planning something, how the festival had a bun contest, a bandstand concert, and one very dramatic kite category called Best Recovery from Disaster. Best Recovery from Disaster? Adrian repeated. Yes. That is a real category? It should win every year. Last summer, one kite got stuck on the lifeboat mast and still came second. He tied another knot. I see. Nia leaned back on her hands. Why did you come here? He kept his eyes on the frame. To work. That's not a real answer. It is accurate. It's boring. He said nothing. She waited. Eventually he said, because in London every room knew my name before I entered it. Nia frowned. That sounds useful. It becomes tiring. How? He set the frame down. People stop talking to you like a person. They talk to what they think you are, and after a while, you start doing it too. Nia took this in. So you came here because the sea doesn't care. He gave a small nod. Yes. She seemed satisfied with that. Then she pointed at his knot. That one's ugly. He looked down. It was. He sighed. Again. By late afternoon, Comet lay finished on the table between them. Not new, not untouched. Better. The red paper still showed its history. The old white patches remained. The blue tail was shorter now, joined by two small yellow ribbons that fluttered lightly in the breeze. The frame was straighter, but still alive. The joints flexed when turned. The whole kite seemed less like a machine and more like a conversation. Nia touched it with both hands. You didn't erase it. No. You actually fixed it. Yes. You're getting better. I was always competent. At rockets, maybe. He almost corrected her, then let it go. Would you like to test it? She looked up sharply. Now? Yes. They took Comet to the narrow beach below the cliff, where the tide had left a smooth stretch of damp sand. No crowd this time, just the sea, the wind, and the long evening light turning everything honey gold. Adrian held the kite while Nia took the spool. Ready? He asked. She nodded. He lifted Comet into the wind. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the paper filled. The frame trembled once and rose. No buzz, no panic, no hard correction. It climbed with a small living pull, dipping and answering, swaying and recovering until it found its line and held. Nia laughed so loudly the gulls lifted from the rocks. It's flying! Yes, it's actually flying. Yes, it likes me again. Adrian looked up at the kite. The tail rippled blue and yellow against the sky. Not perfect, not rigid, not controlled, alive in the wind. Nia passed him the spool. Feel. He took it. At first his grip was too tight, then he loosened. The line hummed lightly between his fingers. Tiny changes, tiny messages. Pressure, release, angle, pull, not command, exchange. For the first time in years, Adrian Vale did not feel as though he was forcing a system to obey. He felt as though he was in conversation with something larger than himself. Nia watched him. Well? He kept his eyes on the sky. Well, he said quietly, I may have misjudged kites. You definitely did. He smiled. After that, things in Gull's Point began to change in small and noticeable ways. People still stared when Adrian passed through the square, but now they also waved. He fixed the school's weather station, but only after asking the science teacher what the children actually needed from it. He repaired the bakery timer without replacing the whole oven. He showed Mr. Talbot how to use a simple water sensor in the boathouse, then wrote the instructions in large print and left them in a plastic sleeve by the wall instead of hiding them inside an app. He even bought fish from the market like a person who intended to eat and not just survive on coffee and almonds. The town approved, or at least it downgraded him from suspicious phenomenon to useful eccentric. Nia, naturally, behaved as though she had personally trained him. On Friday afternoon, she arrived with a notebook and announced, I have made a list. A list of what? Things you should and should not do at wind day. He looked up from his desk. Is there a risk assessment? There should be. Last year, Mr. Talbot nearly set fire to the bun tent with a portable grill. She opened the notebook. Number 1, do not act weird if people clap. I do not act weird. You do. Number 2, if you win anything, do not give a speech longer than 20 seconds. Number 3, if Mrs. Penrose offers you rhubarb buns, say yes even if you are confused. What if I do not like rhubarb? Then pretend. He leaned back in his chair. Is this list official? It is if you want to survive. He took the notebook from her and glanced down the page. Number 4, do not improve anything during the festival unless someone asks. Number 5, children get first turn with the line if it's their kite. Number 6, if the band plays badly, smile anyway. Number 7, no robot surprises. He looked up. That last one feels personal. It is. The festival morning dawned bright and windy. The whole town seemed to wake smiling. Bunting snapped over the square. Tables appeared in rows like magic. The harbor wall filled with potted flowers, paper streamers, and children already carrying kites larger than themselves. There were hand-painted signs for coconut shy, cake stall, raffle, and see-song contest. Someone had hung tiny colored ribbons from the lampposts, so the whole street looked as though it were trying to fly. Adrian stood near the edge of the green in a navy jacket, holding Comet under one arm while Nia bounced on the balls of her feet beside him. "You are doing the face," she said. "What face?" "The one where it looks like you've come to negotiate a merger." "I have never negotiated a merger on a village green." "There. That. Less of that." He exhaled. "This is a lot of people." "It's only the town." "Yes. That's less than the internet." A fair point. Nia's mother, Leah, appeared carrying 2 cups of tea and a paper plate piled with buns. She was warm-faced and quick-smiling, with wind-tangled hair tucked into a scarf. "For the nervous engineers," she said. "I'm not nervous," Adrian replied. Leah handed him a cup anyway. "Then it's preventive tea." Nia took a bun. "Mum, he rebuilt Comet properly." "So I hear. Granddad said the frame join was respectable." Adrian looked genuinely pleased by that. "He said respectable?" "He did." Nia bit into her bun. "That's basically a standing ovation from him." Across the green, children began running with their kites. Color lifted into the air. Orange diamonds, green deltas. A giant octopus someone had rented from the next town over. A tiny yellow bird that immediately nosedived into a hedge. Music started near the bandstand. The whole place felt windblown and generous. At 11, the flying contest began. Categories were announced through an old microphone that made everyone sound mildly haunted. Highest flyer, best handmade kite, most imaginative design, most spectacular failure, best recovery from disaster. Nia stood with Comet against her shoulder and listened as if hearing the names of Olympic events. "Which one are we doing?" Adrian asked. "We are not doing spectacular failure," she said at once. "That sounds wise. We're doing handmade, and maybe recovery from disaster if anyone appreciates history." They joined the queue. A boy in a striped jumper held a kite shaped like a dragon. A little girl with missing front teeth carried one covered in silver stars. An elderly man in a flat cap had built a box kite so severe and square it looked like it could file taxes. Then it was Nia's turn. She stepped into the open space, handed Adrian the spool, and lifted Comet. "Ready?" she asked. He looked at her, not the kite. "Yes." She launched. Comet rose beautifully, not dramatically, not like a machine showing off. Better than that. It rose with confidence, a few eager dips, then a steady climb. The yellow ribbons flickered. The patched red body caught the sun. It looked handmade because it was, repaired because it had been, loved because that was impossible to hide. People noticed, first the near ones, then more. Mrs. Penrose clapped. Mr. Talbot whistled through his teeth. Nia Bell smiled so widely she had to wipe at one eye with the back of her hand and pretend it was just the wind. Nia handed Adrian the line and stepped back. "Your turn." He stared at her. "In front of everyone?" "Yes." "That seems unnecessary." "It is completely necessary." There was no getting out of it. He took the spool. For 1 second, old instincts rushed in. Grip, control, correct. Then he felt the line tighten and remembered. Listen first. The kite moved. He answered, not dominating, not surrendering, just reading, giving, following, holding. The wind changed. Comet dipped left. He let a fraction more line go, then drew it in again. The kite recovered, climbed, and steadied. The crowd made that soft collective sound people make when something simple becomes beautiful because it is done well. Adrian felt a strange pressure in his chest. Not stress, not performance, something lighter. Nia stood beside him with both hands in her coat pockets, trying to look casual and failing because she was glowing. "You're doing it," she whispered. "Yes." "You're not overthinking." "I might be medium thinking. I'll take it." Then, just as the judges moved closer, a harder gust swept in from the water. 3 kites pitched at once. The dragon twisted sharply. The octopus sagged. A plastic stunt kite snapped its line and skittered off towards the chip stand to general screaming. Comet dropped fast. The old Adrian would have yanked. The old Adrian would have forced correction. Instead, he felt the pull, let the line breathe, angled his wrist, waited a heartbeat longer than fear wanted, and gave the kite space to find itself. It shuddered, turned, caught, rose. The crowd erupted, not because it was flashy, because they had seen the danger and then the grace. Beside him, Nia jumped straight off the ground. "That was ours!" she shouted. "That was ours!" Adrian laughed out loud, a proper laugh this time, open and bright and impossible to mistake. Later, after judging and tea and a deeply competitive bun debate, the results were announced. Best spectacular failure went to the dragon, which had wrapped itself around a loudspeaker. Highest flyer went to the square tax-paying kite. Most imaginative design went to the octopus. Best handmade kite went to Nia Bell for Comet. Best recovery from disaster also went to Nia Bell for Comet, on account of emotional perseverance and visible patch history, according to the official judge, who was Mrs. Penrose and had clearly taken the role very seriously. Nia accepted both ribbons with solemn dignity for nearly 4 seconds before shouting, "Comet did it!" The green cheered. She turned and pulled Adrian into the celebration before he could escape, thrusting one ribbon at him. "This is yours too." "No, it was your kite. You helped. You rebuilt it. You listened." He paused. That landed more deeply than she knew, so he took the ribbon. All afternoon people came and went in waves. They ate cake. They watched races. They argued cheerfully about jam. Children ran past with streamers trailing behind them like comets of their own. At one point, Mr. Talbot approached Adrian holding a paper plate and said, "For a man who nearly mechanized a kite into a hedge, you turned out all right." Adrian accepted the plate. "Thank you, I think. Don't get smug. I'll try not to." "Good." By late afternoon, the wind softened. The festival drifted into that golden tired feeling souhaits sometimes carry at the end, when everyone is sun-flushed and content and slightly reluctant to let it finish. Nia and Adrian sat on the harbor wall with their feet dangling above the lower stones. Comet lay folded carefully beside them. For a while they watched the water. Then Nia said, "So what was the thing you were really building?" Adrian glanced at her. "The big secret thing." "It is not secret. You had 6 mysterious crates." "That does create a certain atmosphere." Nia waited. He looked out to sea. "It's a coastal response network," he said. "Drones, sensors, weather mapping, something that might help towns like this prepare for storms and rescue people faster." Nia nodded slowly. "That's good. I hope so. You sound like someone who's not sure." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I knew what I wanted it to do. I was less certain that I remembered how to make things serve people instead of impress them." Nia frowned at the horizon. "That's a bit sad." "Yes. But better now." He thought of the line in his hand, the flex in the joints, the way Comet had recovered because it had room to. "Yes," he said. "Better now." She nodded as if approving this outcome. Then she said, "You should build a workshop." He looked at her. "A workshop?" "For kids and people. Proper one, with wood and tools and glue and bits and paper and all the things. Not just weird silver cases." He nearly smiled. "That is a very specific proposal. You've got the house for it, or the shed, and you know loads of things. I also know very complicated things that no one in town asked for. Then teach the useful ones." He considered it. Below them, the tide slapped quietly against the harbor wall. In the square behind them, someone was packing chairs away. Someone else was singing badly. A dog barked exactly once at a gull and lost the argument. For the first time in a very long while, Adrian Vale could see a future that did not involve proving he was still the smartest person in a room. It looked smaller than that, and better. 3 weeks later, the old lifeboat storage shed at the edge of Gull's Point reopened with a new painted sign. The making room. Small things welcome. On the first Saturday morning, children arrived with broken torches, cracked toy boats, snapped model wings, loose buttons, bent scooter handles, and one mystery object that might once have been a clock. Mr. Talbot came with a weathered oar that didn't need fixing, just looking at. Mrs. Penrose brought lemon biscuits for morale. Nia Bell came with extra mugs. Nia came first, naturally, carrying Comet. It had another patch. "What happened now?" Adrian asked. "Festival victory lap," she said. "Fence incident." He nodded. "Understandable." Inside, the workshop smelled of wood shavings, tea, and possibility. There were shelves of labeled jars, but not too many. There were proper tools, but also glue sticks, a workbench for measuring, a corner table for painting, and a notice board that read, "Make, mend, try again. Ask for help. Do less if less works." Mina had insisted that last one be included. Adrian had not argued. Throughout the morning, he moved from table to table showing, not performing, how to brace a small wing, how to test a switch, how to bind a handle, how to tell when a thing needed replacing and when it simply needed patience. Every so often, he would begin to explain something at his old speed, then catch himself, stop, and start again in human language. Nia noticed every time. At noon, she climbed onto the stool beside him and said, "You know, you're much better now." At what? At not turning everything into a TED Talk. He looked at her. A crushing critique. You needed it. Perhaps. She unrolled Comet on the bench. The kite looked happy in a way only beloved objects can, a little weathered, a little crooked, entirely itself. Adrian ran a thumb along the newest patch. "Do you want me to reinforce this side?" "No." "No?" "It still flies." He glanced up. Nia smiled. "See," she said. "You're learning." Summer moved on. The tourists came and went. The gulls remained criminals. The sea remained beautiful and unimpressed. Project Turn changed shape, not its purpose, its philosophy. Adrian rebuilt the unstable response logic from the ground up, using flexible local rules instead of rigid central correction. Let each unit read the wind rather than fight it. Let the system adapt through conversation, not force. When he finally tested the revised coastal drones above the cliffs one gray morning in September, they moved like a flock instead of a marching band. Mina watched the display and said, "The variance issue is gone." "Yes." "What changed?" He looked out at the machines banking gently over the water. "I stopped trying to make them smarter than the air." She nodded once. "That'll do it." Months later, when journalists eventually came to write about the successful launch of his new system, they wanted the usual story: vision, disruption, breakthrough. Adrian gave them the safe version. He talked about local testing conditions and environmental modeling and adaptive response frameworks. He did not mention Nia Bell. He did not mention Comet. He did not mention the field above the harbor, or the lesson in the line, or the fact that some of the most important corrections in a life begin as embarrassment. Those things were his, and in a way, the town's. But in the final interview, when one reporter asked, "After everything you've built, what changed the way you think about engineering?" he did smile slightly before answering. "A kite," he said. The reporter laughed, assuming it was a joke. Adrian let him. The next Wind Day festival was bigger than the last. There were more visitors, more stalls, more ribbons, and a regrettable new attempt at gourmet seaweed fudge. The making room entered a kite team made entirely of children under 12 and one retired fisherman who refused to admit he was enjoying himself. Comet flew again, of course. So did 12 new kites made in the workshop, some elegant, some chaotic, one shaped like a teapot, one shaped like a crescent moon, one that looked nothing like its intended dolphin but still received a prize for courage. Late in the afternoon, as the sky softened to pale gold, Nia stood beside Adrian on the cliff field and handed him a new spool. "What's this one?" She grinned. His eyebrows lifted. The kite waiting on the grass was simple. Red body, blue and yellow ribbons, a familiar shape, but smaller, lighter. The frame was beautifully balanced. "What did you do?" he asked. I built it. He looked at her properly. With Granddad's help, she added. And some from the workshop. But mostly me. He took the kite in his hands. The joins were neat. The tension was right. The weight was honest. No hidden parts, no clever trap, just good making. You didn't ask me to fix anything, he said. I know. Why not? She smiled out at the sea. Because now you know some things don't need fixing. They just need flying. For once, Adrian Vale had no better sentence than that. So he nodded. Together, they launched the kite into the evening wind. It rose easily. Not because it was perfect, because it was enough. Because the hands that made it had listened. Because the sky had room for small things done well. And because somewhere between the million-pound systems and the patched red paper and the laughter on a windy field, a man who could build almost anything had finally remembered the difference between control and care. Below them, Gull's Point glowed. The bakery lights were coming on. The harbor was bright with late sun. Voices drifted upward from the square. A band was beginning again somewhere, slightly out of tune and utterly sincere. The new kite pulled gently on the line. Adrian led it. Beside him, Nia leaned into the wind with her eyes on the sky. Next year, she said, we should build a giant one. He looked down at her. How giant? She spread her arms as wide as they would go. Reasonable giant. That is not a unit. It is in this town. He laughed. All right, he said. Reasonable giant. Nia nodded, satisfied, and together they stood on the hill above the sea, holding a line that hummed with wind and patience and the quiet happiness of things made simply enough to fly. Some people spend years learning how to make things bigger, faster, smarter, and harder to break. That matters. But there is another kind of wisdom too. The kind that asks whether more is actually better. The kind that remembers repair is not failure. The kind that knows a patch can become part of the beauty. A kite only rises when it meets the wind honestly, not by conquering it, by listening to it. And perhaps people are not so different.